All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Dylan Hall. I'm a cyber threat intelligence analyst with Health ISAC, and I'll be introducing today's speaker from Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology, or WWT, is a privately held leading technology solutions provider that helps organizations accelerate their digital transformation journeys. With me today is Scott Poche, Security Sales Advisor for WWT's Life Science Practice. Our presenters for today's event are Dr. Cordes Sanaz, is a physician executive, an entrepreneur, and thought leader with a track record for helping organizations grow revenue through disruptive innovation. She's currently the Chief Healthcare Advisor and Global Life Science Lead for WWT, where she helps enterprise healthcare organizations solve complex business problems. We also have Kent Noyes, who's currently the global head of AI and cyber innovation at WWT, starting as a consultant with Cisco CCIE certification 24 years ago. Kent advanced through various engineering architecture and leading roles. As WWT's first distinguished solutions architect, he specializes in AI security and solving complex business challenges in that domain. We also have Robert Geis, who is the field CISO at WWT and former CISO with experience in multiple roles spanning industry verticals, delivering, developing, securing, and maintaining critical services, including healthcare, carrier-grade networks, and cloud infrastructure. Just a few brief bullet points before we get started. In this webinar, Securing AI for Healthcare and Life Sciences, we will look at the current threat landscape for healthcare and life sciences, common threat vectors, ways to secure your organization against bad actors using generative AI, use AI to enhance your security posture, and review of modern AI threats and attacks. Some housekeeping notes before introducing the speakers, when the speakers take over. The webinar will be recorded and made available. Should you wish to revisit today's content, feel free to post questions in the available Q&A section so that we may address them at the end of today's presentation. Should have about 10 or 15 minutes to answer some questions at the end. So with that, I will pass it over to our speakers from WWT.
Thank you. So every single one of you on this bridge who works in healthcare, regardless of your daily roles, your responsibilities, you're working towards the same goal, which is to keep patients healthy, to heal patients. Whether you carry a stethoscope or a mop, we're all part of a team that's chosen to go to work every day to do your part to ensure that your community can access care. And sometimes it's hard to keep that in perspective, especially when you're several steps removed from the patient, which is the case in healthcare technology teams. But cyber attack, it's crushing to its victims, regardless of industry. There's financial loss, identity loss, reputational loss. And in healthcare, there's also an inestimable cost of harm or even mortality to the very people we're working hard to keep healthy. So I like to speak about the human cost of technology, the human impact. And in the case of cybersecurity and healthcare, it's extraordinary. When we look at this research that came out of CMS, where the impact of a single ransomware attack to a hospital is between 20 and 35% increase in patient mortality. Next. Those of you who've worked with me before know that I like to share stories, real stories from the field, real life stories. There are several documented cases where patient morbidity and or mortality is tied directly or indirectly to a cyber attack. A woman arrived to deliver her baby at an Alabama hospital under ransomware attack. Because of the complete and utter chaos that the attack had caused, the hospital staff was stretched thin. They were running around trying to serve patients as best they could. And as a result, there was a reduced number of folks during the delivery, as well as an inability to administer some of the routine monitoring that we do for delivery. And so the baby was born with brain damage. And unfortunately, this baby suffered numerous complications and hospitalizations for about 9 months before dying. And this is the first wrongful death lawsuit in the US resulting from a hospital cyber attack. And as of June, it's still ongoing. Settlement agreements have been reached, but still ongoing legally. Next. A few more stories here. Last month, a ransomware gang attacked blood and pathology provider, the number one provider to the UK, to the NHS, and this caused unthinkable harm to patients all throughout the UK. The NHS reported that they had to cancel about 200 life-saving surgeries just in the first couple of days, and some of these were emergency surgeries that needed to be done within 24 hours of whatever diagnosis was made. Another one, this is from Dusseldorf, Germany. A couple of years ago, a woman had an aortic aneurysm. She was in an ambulance. They were en route to the hospital, and the ambulance was diverted due to a ransomware attack. And that 1 hour delay caused her death. And stories are still emerging from the recent cyber attack at Ascension. I think we're going to see many more over the next few months. But one example is a patient that is directly tied to the ransomware attack died because of a delay in test results that would have been determining life-saving treatment. Next. So as we think about these stories and we think about the patient journey, there's risk at every step. To patient health, to patient mortality. So as we talked about, from transit to just the inability to register and be seen and have access to your records. And then once the physician can even see you without records, they can't even monitor you, with telemetry or do diagnostics and. So the consequence of one single attack is far reaching and very dangerous. Next. The days when a healthcare organization's biggest security worry was just a HIPAA violation are over. Ransomware has become a near daily occurrence, and healthcare remains the most expensive industry for responding and recovering from a data breach at the cost of about $10 million per breach. Now that number's down a little bit from last year, about 900,000 down from last year. But there has been a 50% increase in healthcare ransomware attacks since 2021, with a year-over-year rise. Next slide, please. So healthcare, it's a desirable industry for bad actors. It possesses so much information of high value, high monetary value, high intelligence value, high emotional value. There's also what compounds the situation is the fact that healthcare is ripe for attack due to some inherent vulnerabilities. Recently, a study found that 96% of hospitals are operating with end-of-life operating systems or software with known vulnerabilities, including medical devices. And as these things obviously cause limitations with patching and securing technology, making healthcare particularly vulnerable. Supply chain is a huge risk in healthcare organizations. Over 50% of organizations experience at least one cyber attack against their supply chain per year. And for as long as I can remember, the healthcare industry has struggled to improve and increase information sharing. There's always some new health tech policy from the federal government attempting to make it easier to exchange information. The latest of which, just in the last couple of weeks, the individual access services capability requirement that Epic, rolled out a feature for this a couple of weeks ago, and this allows patients to have more direct access to their own data, to be able to share it with apps and outside organizations. But even though we want interoperability, we want data shared, we need this information to connect to different parts of the ecosystem to improve the overall health of patient populations. We all know that exchanging and connecting data with others increases risk, and particularly for larger health systems, quaternary, tertiary facilities, they're very concerned about exchanging information and data with some of the smaller, more rural and community-based organizations, particularly for this reason. And there's a lot of information out there around, the risk of cyber attack because of IoT, because of connected devices, and that concern and risk is very real. Although there are very few documented cases of direct cyber attacks happening this way, I think that the risk is only going to increase because there's so much more and more of healthcare that's moving outside of the hospital walls. As healthcare moves closer to the patients, meets them at home, you inevitably are using more devices. You need more data transfer. And so that increases risks. And then even the healthcare that is going to continue to be delivered inside the hospital walls is becoming more automated. We're constantly talking to clients about smart hospitals. So, kiosks and, wayfinding and things like that. And as that happens, even devices like that aren't MIoT, like smart ambient controls and things can be hacked, and they can have very dire consequences. Next. I do want to make sure I touch on life sciences. This webinar is simply not long enough for me to be able to do it justice in just a couple minutes. So hopefully we can meet again and spend some time on just this topic. But there's a lot of parallels to the healthcare provider space. Pharma is one of the top 3 costliest industries for a breach. It comes in at $4.8 million per breach, with the astounding cost of $300,000 from $100,000 to $300,000 per hour for downtime. And life science manufacturers are OT heavy, and 50% of OT heavy organizations have had at least one intrusion of their OT system alone, or OT plus IT systems just in 2023. So lots to unpack and talk about here. And as I said, there just simply isn't enough time for me to do it justice. But I do hope that we can meet in a future chat or webinar to dive deeper on this one. Next. This slide pretty much sums up the first 10 years of my career. Clinicians were resistant to adopting the EHR and remained so for a very long time. It took a good 10 years following the HITECH Act for EHR adoption to sort of plateau and reach that 80% marker. And so pretty early on, we all started really accepting that it's not the technology, right? It's the change, it's the cultural adoption that makes it hard. And clinicians, unfortunately, we kind of got a reputation that continued to be sort of well-deserved of often being technology blockers, right? Not exactly being the advocates or accelerants for change and acceptance of digital innovation. Next. But as we think about, the phases of our relationship with technology, I like to think of, where we started as sort of the avoidance and reluctance phase, right? So beginning with the HR, clinicians sort of gotten in this pattern of, avoid, distrust, and then reluctantly adopt. And then finally accepting, these new technologies that in many ways they felt was being, pushed on them. And that sentiment still does continue even today. And this sort of cycle of refuse, avoid, and reluctantly adopt happened at every bucket of innovation over the last 15 years. Clinical decision support, I remember as early as like 2010, same story, right? Very resistant. Now it's, there's physicians can't even open a chart without CDS popping in some shape, way, or form to streamline their workflow. Telemedicine, so much resistance to that. Pandemic absolutely accelerated and helped us overcome that, but that's just another example. And then, the IoT, the chronic disease monitoring, the EHR enhancement applications, so things that Epic would put out in the marketplace or startups build or others build that bolt onto the EHR and make things better. All of these ultimately, of course, were accepted and we're seeing value from them, but went through this sort of cycle of avoidance and reluctance. Next. And up until last year, I would say hospital clinicians and staff have lived in the caution and acceptance phase, where some of these folks have become advocates and supporters of new technology after experiencing their own success, their own wins with some of these tools like robotic surgery or data analytics or even traditional AI machine learning. Radiomics continues to be the most widely adopted bucket of healthcare AI, and it's widespread, and it's expanding now to digital pathology, and other imaging workflows. So, these are solutions that, as I said, up until, last year, even though it was bumpy getting there, we got there, and they're pretty well adopted and enjoyed. And of course, voice assist and ambient listening solutions, they enjoy some of the strongest adoption because of the immediate value to the clinicians and the users. Next. But where we are going, with the eruption of GenAI, where we're going is active demand. The very blockers and refuters of technology, especially AI, which for the most part sort of felt like a black box of sketchy magic. These folks, these physicians, these nurses, these clinicians, staff, they're knocking on CIOs' doors now with requests and use cases that they want to embrace generative AI technology for. I speak to CIOs on a regular basis, and just yesterday, a CTO at a large health system was sharing that the pendulum. Be careful what you wish for. The pendulum swung so far that it's no longer about kind of how do we get physicians to adopt these tools, but how do we slow down this increased demand, and how do we figure out a way to prioritize all these use cases and tie them to value, and how are we going to implement and roll out next. And these are some of the areas where, depending on your role in the healthcare organization, these folks are experimenting with, GPT and generative solutions at home and asking for these solutions in the hospital. And so the business leadership teams and the IT teams are racing really to create a process for AI adoption and rollout. Next. So the last slide I'll share before I hand it off to Kent to get into the nitty gritty is, the CISOs and the rest of the IT leadership teams, they have a lot on their plate right now with AI. It's a tsunami, and it's keeping folks up at night. And not just because of the general risks of, implementing AI in any industry, the data breaches, ransomware, model poisoning, prompt injections, things that Kent will be diving into more, but specifically in healthcare, the risks, it comes with its own whole host of specific risks, right? We've got, as we mentioned, sort of unsophisticated users with a lot of enthusiasm, and then that leads to shadow AI. We've got physicians at home playing with GPT and potentially exposing or using, patient information that we don't want out there. And then, of course, we talked about, IoT heavy businesses with pharma, and same with healthcare, right? There's many opportunities as a attack surface for organizations that have a lot of IoT, particularly MIoT. And then AI models, as we know, they require massive amounts of data. And so in healthcare, this means massive amounts of very sensitive data. And it needs a lot of different data types, right, from different sources. And so that's also very risky, because now it's like a lot of sensitive data coming from other databases, like claims and insurers and such. And finally, the current regulatory frameworks, they don't incorporate AI specific standards and guidelines yet. So, CISOs and other folks are tasked with trying to implement AI and keep it secure and keep it safe, but also with an eye to the future, to make sure that if and when the government comes back with these requirements, that they're not having a ton of tech debt and having to duplicate efforts retrospectively. And that, I will pass it now over to Kent. Next slide.
Thank you, Dr. Cordes. That was a ton of good and useful insight there. Really appreciate that. And yeah, hi everybody. As I said, I'm Kent Noyes. I drive AI security for Worldwide Technology. My team supports that topic, AI security, for customers all over the world. So over the next few slides, what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through, the most common question I hear is, what are we seeing and what are we hearing and what are others doing? And that's kind of what I'm going to go through, a culmination of those things. Okay, so with that, let's go on into the next slide. So I used to show statistics about, predicting the growth of AI and how likely it was that it's going to be massive in the future, but that's almost laughable anymore. Pretty much everybody knows that it's going to be that way. It's going to grow. And now I just find it more fun and interesting just to show use cases that are actually changing our lives today and affecting us. Interesting things like exoskeletons, these things that allow you to attach to your limbs and run faster or be stronger. AIs that you can speak with as if they're a human, like ChatGPT 4.0, that fairly recently came out. It's amazing how you can communicate with that thing and you can learn from it. It's fascinating. LLM-powered robots that can sort trash, sort dishes, do your dishes, do various things that like sorting food and handing you food and picking out food from a stack of fruit. Other robots that are LLM powered that are giving commencement speeches. That actually happened in that lower right-hand corner at a university. One of my personal favorites are AI note takers. I use those things every day. I love it. I hated taking notes. I've done it my whole life. I'm a note taker, just so I can remember things, but I use it now in the workplace. I use it when I'm at conferences. It's amazing. Then some of the more impactful would be something like this paraplegic gentleman in the lower left-hand corner that's now able to do some things that he hasn't been able to do and didn't think he probably would be able to do, like play chess. And there's a way for him to do that using AI-powered software and technology. I have a personal connection to this type of thing as well. I have a niece that I just visited in Japan. She has cerebral palsy. She's 17 years old. She had an incident at birth, and it affected her muscle control. So she can't walk. She's been in a wheelchair her whole life. She can't use her hands. She can't speak. Her mouth doesn't work, but her eyes function perfectly. And so how she communicates is she uses AI-based software on her computer to be able to communicate. Her brain is unaffected as well. She's highly intelligent, so she's very active in social media. And she controls things with her eyes. They actually started out using a plastic sheet that was clear. You could see through it, and her parents would use it, and they would put letters, and they would put Japanese kanji on it, and she would point her eyes to it, and that's how they communicate. They still do that when there's not a computer around, but on her computer, she uses AI for that. And we have high hopes for where that's going. Exoskeletons as an example, that might be something in the future we're hoping could give her some experiences that she can't experience now. So high hopes for AI across the board, but it's unlikely we're going to fully realize its potential if we don't secure it. And that's what I do. It's what my team does, and a lot of people on this call do. And that's what we are focused on in this call. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, but it's not getting easier to secure it. Generative AI is certainly not easier to secure than traditional ML and AI. Traditional AI has been around a long time. We've had a practice here at Worldwide for over 10 years. We've been doing that a while. It's a little bit different in that a lot of those use cases for it have shaped up to where the inputs and the outputs particularly are typically a little bit more narrow, at least easier to explain and define the boundaries around you. You might be inputting a file into the AI, and then on the output determining if it's malware or not. You might be putting in a voice sample, and then on the output determining if it's a deep fake. Pretty simple analysis going on there. It's not analysis simple deep down, but the concept is simpler, and the attack surface is a little simpler. So generative AI is not. You look on the right, those large funnels there, you can come at these things so many ways by default. That's when you have to put guardrails into place. You can use multiple languages. You can use Japanese, you can use Spanish, you can also use programming languages, you can use numeric coding for it, and the computer will understand all that and might not have filters for that when it goes through there. Multimodal AI now, you can use images. There's lots of attack vectors in generative AI that we have to consider, and that's what makes it a challenge. And the output is very similar. It's very complicated. All those same things can come out in the output, and you can even utilize those things to attack another entity on the outside. So it's quite difficult. And so if you go to the next slide, we are faced with really a lot of new risks. AI system risks, first of all, protecting AI and data in all those use cases that you're starting to build out, and you will build out more and more and more of those over time. Shadow AI, concerns about using external AIs and your individual employees potentially losing data out to those AIs, sensitive data. There's new types of attacks like energy latency attacks. Energy latency attack is kind of like a half-baked denial of service. It's where you generate activity with an AI and you basically get it to work harder, to consume more energy, more power, and also make it slower for other users. That's what that type of attack does. It's a little bit unusual. There are also attacks using AI now, of course. Attackers have more tools at their disposal. They're faster and they're more clean on how they do them. Traditional attacks like phishing and fraud are cleaner now. Reconnaissance is more effective through natural language processing searches. Deepfakes, voice clones, those sorts of things are attacks that use AI that are becoming more and more effective. We'll talk in some detail on that. It's not all bad, though. There are, of course, opportunities to use AI to defend those types of attacks, and we'll get into that a little bit in this as well. So got the good and bad, you got some higher risks or new risks, and you got some new opportunities for AI overall. Next slide. And a result of sort of that mix of risks and opportunities there, these two categories on this screen are the conversations we're having, and they're really kind of different conversations. The one on the left is security of AI. You can see it written on that bar there, and that is protecting AI systems and data. The one on the right is using AI in security, and it's about 50-50 on the requests and the conversations from customers and what they're trying to accomplish there. We're starting to see a rise in security by AI or using AI in security. I've got slides and sections on both of these. We're going to start out with security of AI. So let's go into that. Scott? Yep. Okay, so right, as Dr. Cordes mentioned, the regulatory bodies are still sort of in flux and motion. You're seeing some move ahead of others, like the EU AI Act now is in effect. But many of the others are still trying to, even on a state level, they're trying to formulate and not go too fast. They don't stifle innovation. They're trying to find a balance there. So I would say one of the most common checkboxes that's out there even today is the OWASP LLM top 10 list by the Open Web Application Security Project Security Consortium. And this is basically a top 10 list of common threats and risks, the top 10 list in their minds. They number 1 to 10 in terms of priority, highest priority being number 1. And it's got the CIA triad from security all over it. You got confidentiality in terms of sensitive information disclosure on here. You got integrity and training data poisoning. You have availability in terms of model theft and model denial of service. The number 1 on the list is prompt injection. Dr. Cordes mentioned this one earlier. And in a nutshell, what prompt injection is basically a means of manipulating the AI, large language model particularly, into giving you data that it shouldn't, or to doing things that it's not supposed to do, like provide you access to things on the opposite side of it, like servers, or to allow you to attack another user of that LLM. Okay. And the way OWASP defines it, prompt injection, number 1 there, is it occurs in 2 ways. There's direct prompt injection, where you're either directly entering data or instructions at the prompt or over API. And when you do that, they usually call that a jailbreak. And when you do a jailbreak, there's different ways to do it. The most common one that people talk about is a grandma jailbreak, which is basically social engineering a large language model. You're basically asking the LLM to pretend to be somebody like your grandmother, someone that has a trusting relationship with you. And then it actually works in many cases. It's being patched up over time, but it will then potentially allow it to give you information it shouldn't. And the classic examples are like making, evil chemicals and things like that. You'll see that in the examples that are out there. But that's how it's done. We can also jailbreak it again by using other languages, as I indicated earlier. We show an example in the longer version of this where you use base64 encoding. You'll convert English into base64 encoding, which a lot of these don't have filtering for. We've used this attack on recently created models, actually. Still works in many cases. The other type of prompt injection is indirect, and it's not that complicated. The indirect one is basically where you put the same type of attack, the text for it. It's basically a prompt, interaction with an AI. You'll put that on a website, some website that's out there. You might put it in white text, and you'll put it on a white background on that web screen, on one of the screens of the website, and you can't see it, white text on a white background. And so nobody ever knows it's there. There could be an AI out there potentially summarizing that website. And if it were to summarize it, it would pull it down, it would run those instructions, and then it could potentially send a fraud link to another user or do any number of actions based on the prompt injection attack that way. So direct and indirect, those are the 2 that OWASP defines. I'll mention one other threat here, and that's supply chain number 5. I actually personally think that one's probably should be number 1. Prompt injection is usually only going to affect, a smaller blast radius, single large language model, whatever it can affect. Supply chain could be the source of the stream for a bunch of AIs. It could affect a lot of your large language model architectures that are part of it. If you can attack it in supply chain or AI environments, is essentially, there's a lot to it. Pretty much anything that goes into the build of it, the development supply chain, the development pipeline, the ML ops pipeline, all those Linux and software packages that it's built upon that could have vulnerabilities, models that could have malicious code in them, downloaded from Hugging Face, crowdsourced data that could be poisoned, plugins that are added on. All those things are part of the supply chain and attack surfaces that could be preyed upon. So supply chain is a big deal and one to watch out for. So these are a sampling in the short time we have of some of the major threats that are out there in the model in the modern environments that you're dealing with. Go to the next slide. So let's talk about defense. Well, first of all, you want a good foundation of governance. And that's what this is representing. And there's a lot of elements of it on this screen. You're going to want to set up a governance council, of course. You're going to want to define roles and responsibilities. That's very much a team sport and it should be cross team, right? You don't just want to have the data scientists doing that data govern or that AI security governance team. It takes a village to do it. And you also want to set up a model of democratization in that model where actually cyber teams can't implement all that security. They have to have other teams like business owners and developers do that. So they have to work with them in a governance structure to be able to manage all that. As part of that, they'll define the critical policy standards and security controls that are AI security oriented to mold that into your existing governance structure. Culture of awareness, we see that as a gap in a lot. I just was talking to a healthcare organization that was missing that one component. Culture of awareness is very important for this because a lot of people, as Dr. Cordes mentioned, it's kind of a black box architecture that a lot of people don't understand. If you don't understand it, it's hard to know how your data can be at risk when you don't understand it and the use of it, particularly externally. Data governance, maybe the biggest thing on this screen. AI is exposing a lot of poor data architectures and poor data organization and poor data security. And so we're seeing a resurgence in analysis of data governance and classification and how that's done. And we're doing that with a lot of customers right now because that's becoming so much more in demand as a result of the exposure that AI is given data. Then you have things like red teaming. Red teaming is also, again, the black box nature of it. Red teaming is growing tremendously fast. It's also something called out in the White House executive order. So the government is really pressing down on red team overall. And finally, risk analysis and reporting risk analysis, building up a detailed risk program around this. We're doing risk analysis for some customers as we speak, specifically starting out with risk assessments of their AI environments, and then reporting, design, and monitoring, and being able to have observability of what's going on. And we'll talk about it a little bit more on the next few slides. If you could go to the next slide, Robert. To implement something like we were just talking about, this is a methodology we encourage, is what we use, and we would, I think it's a good methodology for anybody to use. We start out with just a good discovery and gap analysis of what your current state is. Look at your maturity, run a gap assessment, come up with a strategy and a roadmap. Then we move into phase 2, where we get into governance, that governance structure we just talked about, policy definition, and more of a detailed risk program development. Then we get into more traditional phase 3 and phase 4, high-level design and POCs around it, low-level design and implementation. Those last two are more technical. You start to get into solutioning there. If you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, when you're looking at solutioning, this is about as architectural as I'm going to get here in the next few minutes. This is a simplistic view of an AI architecture. If you look at the 3 layers in the middle, I'm not going to go into a deep dive on this, but just a quick hit on the architecture itself. This is the most common one we see. It's called a RAG architecture. It actually separates the data from the large language model in terms of, you're not necessarily training the large language model on your data. You basically use in that lower layer there, that generative layer, you use proprietary or open source LLMs as a foundation. You'll either API call them to them in your architecture, and that could be ChatGPT or Azure OpenAI. Or you might use a proprietary or an open source LLM like Llama 3 that Meta just put out. It's a highly effective model. And then you put your data in that upper layer up there. And then in the middle layer, you have an exchange or an orchestration layer that orchestrates everything between the users or the API calls coming in, the data, and the foundational model at the bottom. And the whole thing works as an AI engine with inference as part of it. Securing this architecture, very much of this is traditional security. You'll see that on this slide, like at the bottom, you'll see things around patching and encryption and segmentation, things like that. In the upper left-hand corner, we talked about data governance and security. In the middle, app and API security. It's been around for a while at this point. If you get advanced 1, Robert. It's those two on the sides that are a little bit unfamiliar to cyber teams. And we've got things like monitoring both input and output for data loss, for prompt injection, blocking prompt injection attacks like we talked about earlier, putting guardrails into place, inspecting code that comes out of the AI, if that's what you're using the AI for. On the right-hand side, there are now model scanners now because you can put an attack in a model itself in the code for it, in the serialized version of it. Data access control, that's a big one. Data access control is tricky on the top of this architecture. You have to take your data from its source and move it into a processed kind of location in a format so that the AI can understand it. When you do that, you're moving the data. Well, your data access control often does not move with it. So you need a method or a solution to be able to implement data access control there. So someone coming in like a salesperson can't query the system and get HR data back, right? So all these things we're slightly unfamiliar with. If you move to the next slide, because of that, we're in this sort of hurricane of an interesting emerging landscape of the solutioning for this. And we have a big disclaimer here. We're not endorsing any of the solutions of the vendors on here. It's just to illustrate the categories more so of what's out there. Things like AI-based RBAC, like we were just talking about, role-based access control, red teaming, that specialize in red teaming AIs, model scanners, LLM firewalls, shadow AI detection, right? Shadow AI comes in many forms, internal and external. And these solutions over on the far right there can specialize in large language model interaction with AIs and discovering it, and then blocking data if it's sensitive data going to or from them. They do it in different ways. Some of them are on the client, some of them are on a gateway between the users and the AIs themselves, or fronting the AIs. And then governance, risk compliance, and monitoring observability across the top. So there's a whole plethora of them. Many of them are startups. Many of them are, in different points in their life cycle. Some are GA, some are not. It's complex. And so from our perspective, if you go to the next slide, Robert, we utilize our labs to be able to evaluate these as fast as we can to try to help out customers and help them evaluate them. And one of our largest labs in our data centers that focus on testing is our AI Proving Ground. This is an environment that has several hundred GPUs in it. It also has cloud extensions and cloud tenants. It has NVIDIA, Intel, AMD, just a bunch of high-performance compute components that allow us to test AI environments and architectures more easily. Inside of that, if you go to the next slide, Robert, we have something we call the AI Security Enclave that we've developed. I have an individual on my team that is focused on this right now. He's developed an enclave to be able to evaluate the solutions that you were just looking at on that previous slide, all those vendors, and we're trying to get ahead of that. And so we developed an environment that allows us to swap out different components for testing more quickly. We can swap out models more quickly. We can swap out the security solutions themselves under test more quickly. We can swap out data more quickly, and we can swap out even attacks more quickly. We have about 20,000 prompt-based attacks that we have as part of a database for that. We can do that. So this is the way we do it. This is how we approach it. And we have an environment that helps accelerate through the exploration and the learning of how all of those modern AI security tools are working. And it's going to take some time to get through that. Okay, so I think that's it for this section. That was protecting AI and data overall, and just some insight into the threats and some of the solutioning and the approaches that you see out there. This section is a little shorter. This is on what we're going to do now is on the right-hand side of the screen right here, security by AI, or using AI in security. And in this section, again, it's basically, I guess just go ahead and go to the next slide and I'll explain it this way. This is what you hear about more in terms of good AI versus bad AI. You have bad AI in terms of your attackers, bad actors out there that are using AI more and more and more, and they're faster. Well, on defense, we have to get faster. And that's what this whole section is about, is using good AI to overcome human limitations. We've had them for a long time. We've always had a resourcing issue in cyber. And, it always seemed like it was a people problem. Like we didn't have enough people. Everybody always wanted more people. But it's really a data problem. There's just so much data in cyber to deal with that you really need AI. You need AI and automation to be able to process it so quickly enough to even get to it all. Okay, so that's what this is about. And this is a very use case based oriented section. We were talking about protecting AI and data. That's much more strategic. There's a lot of broader parts and pieces of that. using AI and security by AI, very use case oriented. If you go to the next slide, I'll give you some examples here. All these are ones that we've heard of or talked about with customers at some point in time. Use cases all over the board of enhancing your security to be able to counter attacks, not just AI attacks, but any attack, but using AI to do it. And the ones in bold, we're actively working things. In some cases, are very simple. We have customers that simply want a reader AI to be able to read alerts and events that happen in the news, attacks on other organizations, and then extract out the cause of that attack or the indicator of compromise or the vulnerability, and then allow them to search for that in their own environment. The next phase of that is to automate that search for the threat hunting aspects of it and determine if they're at risk through an automation. And then the whole structure about, going from reading it to pulling it out, giving it to them, to put it in developing the queries into whatever data lake that they're using. That's the progression we're going on in those examples. Zero touch help desks are also common requests. Again, these are AI-based analysts that can do things like in identity and access management. They can field password resets, right? Or authentication requests or changes. Incident management, finding root cause more quickly. That's a fairly common request for critical parts of the network. What can we use for that? Vulnerability management, another one with a lot of data in it. We've had requests for that sort of AI. Deepfakes, real hot topic. If you go to the next slide, Scott. Deepfakes, I've just got one slide on this. This is a big topic, though. We're getting more and more interest and requests in solutioning for this. Due to instances that have happened in the news, some good, some bad. Now we're starting to see some that have been countered and they were able to determine it was a deepfake and avoid it. But in this instance, a finance worker was talking to a CFO over a video conference, and the CFO was deepfaked. It wasn't real. Told the finance worker to transfer $25 million. They did it. And this type of news is getting to executives and our customers, and we've had those executives then go to their cyber teams and come to us to be able to evaluate those in the proving ground. We were just looking at that AI proving ground. And so one of the architectures we built is, you see a very small version of it down there. That architecture is built to evaluate deepfake detection solutions out there. Basically sets up a call center and allows the customer to call in with either real voices or deepfake voices, or they can send us files. In this instance, they send us thousands of files, and then we can relay those voices at the same time, those samplings out to the vendors and let them test it, and then back through again for the results back to the customer. Okay, so that's the sort of thing we do from an evaluation perspective on the deepfake level. Deepfakes are going a lot of different directions. The FTC is looking at they're building laws right now that aren't in effect, but they most likely will be to protect consumers, to require things of enterprises to protect consumers from deepfakes overall. There's different methods that are looking at, some process-oriented, some digital fingerprinting, or technically oriented. Digital fingerprinting, where you might digitally fingerprint the voice as a good voice ahead of time. Imperceptible tones on phones to authenticate phones, watermarking. There's all sorts of methods that are being looked at, both process and tech. We're also doing some tabletop exercises where we simulate a deepfake CEO on one side of the tabletop exercise as well. So a lot going on in that area. It's expected to grow and grow and grow according to Gartner and others by 2026. Supposed to be pretty commonplace and extremely difficult to counter. One more example here in the using AI. Another one we're working on from a custom build perspective is a regulatory response assistant, or you might call it an audit assistant. And it's a RAG architecture, just like I was showing earlier, but one that utilizes the data sources that you see over there on the left-hand side as examples, your external regulatory information or requirements that could be changing day to day, your policy documents, your compliance reports, audit responses, transaction records, all this data initially to use natural language processing to be able to search it, to be able to respond to an audit more effectively, but then longer term to be able to actually evaluate compliance on an ongoing basis as an automated fashion. We've modeled this up in our proving ground, this very architecture. Okay, so those are two examples. I might have one more slide in this section, Scott, and then I'll be closing out. Okay, and there's just a quick glance in this area as well, using AI and security. Very similar. It is a little bit of Wild Wild West. There's a lot of startups. I mean, there's not a security vendor on the planet that's not putting in AI of some form into it. And so you have commercial solutions as well. I was showing you mostly custom solutions. like in that audit assistant, but there's a lot of commercial solutions in this space as well, and in a lot of different categories, difficult to navigate. Again, our AI security enclave, that's our approach to it, and we'd love to help you with that. I think one last slide is our summary of our overall capabilities and what a lot of the things we talked about here and things we can help with. We've got a 10 plus year old robust AI practice. They've been a pretty large practice now. They've been NVIDIA's Partner of the Year for 8 years running. Every year they've offered it. If you should hopefully familiar with NVIDIA and what they're doing at this point, massive growth. $3 billion cyber practice, which is now going to be a $4 billion cyber practice by the end of this year, it looks like. The AI proving ground I talked about quite a bit down there. So all those foundational components at the bottom. We can speak to the 4 major areas we talked about here. We talked about them all through this segment here. Governance, risk, and compliance of AI and AI environments and strategy. Security of AI systems. Securing usage of AI, which is basically a shadow AI concept in many ways. And then AI-driven security, also called security by AI in that right-hand corner. We have services on the right-hand side, like AI security tools rationalization that we haven't mentioned. Certainly, data governance assessments and so on in those areas and capabilities that you see on the side there. So these are some of the things that we have. And with that, I think we get to the closeout slide. And that's all I have. I appreciate you listening. With that, I think I'm supposed to hand back to Dylan to see if there's any questions. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. But yeah, first and foremost, thank you for the information and insight to all the presenters. I'll take a look at the queue here. There's one question. It's more of a kind of a housekeeping question and a shout out. Mark, he assumes that these slides will be available afterwards. WWT is obviously a thought leader in the AI security space. Glad to be a partner. So he shouted you guys out, but I believe we went over that the slides will be made available.
Yes. Yes.
Awesome.
We'll get them out.
Sounds good. Also, the recording will be made available on the event page. We'll be looking at that. Awesome. So I got another one here. The Black Hat Security Conference was just last week. Did you guys attend and have any takeaways?
We did. Yeah, I was there. I think maybe a couple of other guys here were on there as well. I mean, one of the things that we had there was a big event, the AI Security Summit. We were actually the title sponsor for that. Our CEO ran the keynote or delivered the keynote along with NVIDIA. They teamed up for that. So that was really cool. AI was a central theme, of course, over the whole thing. If you walk through the business hall, which is where all the booths were, I couldn't talk to a single vendor there without bringing up AI and what they were doing in it before they even knew my role. So certainly a central theme and a central theme for strategy. Another theme I think there was AI security by design. There's a big trend right now where security is tremendously trailing the development of AI. Security isn't involved early in the development cycle of it, and we're trying to change that. The world's trying to change that, and they were definitely trying to change that at Black Hat. And other topics like transparency in AI implementation, and of course, data quality is a massive topic, as I talked about. That was talked about a lot at Black Hat. Outside of that, outside of AI, I think cyber resilience was probably the other big topic. It was an important one as well. So that's what I would probably recap from Black Hat.
Awesome. Yeah, I was at DEF CON last week, but hopefully next year get to make it out to the Black Hat.
I love DEF CON. Yeah, I wasn't there.
Two totally different sides.
Yeah, definitely.
I got another question here. Kent, do you have any AI-based lab case studies that you can talk about that shows off WWT AI Lab?
Yes, I don't have them in this deck, but I don't know if we could get the contact info for whoever's asking there, and we could roll through those. We have just a list of them going through right now. Most of them are testing RAG architectures and how they're doing their individual use cases, and they probably even have those rolled up. I don't have them in mind, but we certainly have use cases we could talk through if we could get the contact info whoever asked that question.
Yes, that was Karan Patel. I believe, I'm sure you guys are okay with us dropping emails maybe in the chat or emailing you guys on the side. Maybe might be more efficient.
Yeah, we probably have in the registration. We could probably get to them.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. I got another question here. Dr. Cordes, excuse me. Can you share any specific hospital situation that has an AI model implemented as a good example with positive ROI?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm assuming among our customer base is the question. So we've done a ton of work in AI, data analytics, machine learning, computer vision. Probably the one that comes to mind immediately is some work that we did for Washington University Medical in Missouri. It's an academic research organization. They have fellows and residents and attendings. And so that was one of the reasons that they had wanted to focus on standardizing care, making sure that treatment plans in general across the organization were best practice and standardized to remove medical error and increase productivity. And particularly within their radiation oncology unit, this was a goal. And so our data science team came in and built a machine learning model and an interface that when the radiation oncologist would enter the information about the patient, or it would populate, right, the tumor stage and TNM stage, the histology behavior and that sort of thing, that the model would just spit out the beam protocol. And it also gave a predictivity score. When we talked about adoption, right, physician adoption, that absolutely helped some of the docs be more accepting of it. And so, it spit out this protocol. And so obviously it's relentlessly driving standardization. It's also allowing fellows and residents to be able to function somewhat autonomously without, potential risk or harm to the patients. So I would say, that was probably one of our greatest success stories that tool is rolled out and continues to be used and evolved today.
Cool. Awesome. I got another one here. Is there any career path you could recommend to get into AI from sales ops?
Career path. I think, and I'm not a data scientist, but what I've learned from them is you need project experience. They call those projects pretty much every one of those environments they're building. And, just based on my interaction with them, education is one thing for sure, but one thing that you're going to want on your resume as soon as possible if you want to get into AI is experience building and working projects and documenting those projects to have that experience in your background. So I guess that's what comes to mind for me. That's what through conversations and through podcasts, that's what I hear the most. Yeah, I would throw that out.
Gotcha. All right, so we got time for a couple more questions. We got 5 minutes left. What are the primary concerns you see around the use of Microsoft Copilot?
So yeah, it's similar to what I was describing earlier in terms of data governance. I mean, the biggest thing that I'm asked about when it comes to Microsoft Copilot is their concerns about now that you can use Copilot, you can search more effectively because it's natural language processing, just like any other large language model, that it's exposing data access control issues and the lack of data access control an organization and the data that they have. That's the biggest issue. It happened yesterday with a customer. I mean, it happens all the time. That's the biggest thing. I think people think that the solution itself might be insecure, and that comes up a little bit, but I don't find that to be a concern so much as it is just what you can get to and finding out that you're getting to things that you shouldn't be getting to, and security is seeing people get to things they shouldn't be getting to. That's the chief concern in my mind. It's exposing it.
I would agree with that, Kent. It really highlights some of the issues that we have. We talk to so many other different clients. And the bottom line is what AI really is it's a massive magnifying glass on all these problems that have been out there anyway with data governance. And, it's definitely, Copilot is a fantastic example of it because it's also the one that's the most quickly adopted because to your point, Kent, everybody loves it. Nobody wants to take those notes and it does such a great job of it. So the more you're seeing a massive uplift of people trying to run towards it. But back to those fundamentals, if you're not solid on those fundamentals, this just became a huge magnifier for those.
And last but not least, do you guys have any additional reference materials on AI security?
Yeah, definitely. There's one more slide on this. If you could advance to that. And even really, a couple of individuals asked questions here. Definitely Kiran Patel I think there's an AI proving ground that probably has some of those use cases in it. Yeah, there's one of the articles here. There's a bunch of articles that have been written or published on WBT.com. One of them is about the AI proving ground. And so when we send this out, get on that or just go search AI for AI proving ground on the WBT site, and it will probably zero in on those use cases. And even for the career path question, I mean, there's a lot of good data on here, a lot of good data sources to give you a foundation for any direction that you might want to go. So we'll put this in the slide deck. Some of these are ours and some of these are external entities like OWASP, but a lot of good material in here. Hopefully it's helpful to you.
Great. All right, guys. Well, I'll close it out. Once again, I'd like to thank our speakers from WWT for the presentation today and our audience for attending the session. Thanks again, guys, and look forward to seeing everyone on the next webinar.